So this is James's meal for today, the fancy one. And I put the tahini dressing on the cauliflower things, falafels, I guess, sort of ish. And James is having a pumpkin poutine sort of thing on the side. And I am having just a regular sort of falafel sort of salad with the tahini dressing and pumpkin latte. So we're going to be talking about the Etruscans today. You can go ahead and sit down, James. Was I in the way? Oh. Now, that was a very good series. It was a great course, the Etruscan.
There's a great course.
Great
they're automatically great courses.
Well, not all of them.
Well, some of them are not so
great.
Yeah,
not all of them.
So.
But most of them are really great. Most of them live up to the name.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to just mention this briefly. The Watercolorist Essential Notebook by Gordon Mackenzie is worth reading. And it's worth getting at the same time. Like, really the artwork in here is not awesome, but there's some techniques which are usable. So get this one and work on it first, and then, but borrow them at the same time. This one, The Watercolor Tips and Technique by Arnold Lowry, Wendy Gelbert, Jeff Kersey, and Barry Herneman. Borrow these two at the same time and work on them together. Like this one, there are so many projects to work on that are worth working on. And right now, you're probably thinking, gee, I'm getting ready to do my Christmas cards. Why not do a bunch of little projects for Christmas cards? And each one of your loved ones will get a lovely watercolor painting for your project. And they might not work out so lovely at the first time, but your family will love them because they're better than getting some like generic box of Christmas cards, right? So I totally think you should do that. Everyone should do that. So do you want me to talk about the Etruscan gods and goddesses
you
first?
talk about what you
Okay. Now, I found the second disc most interesting. The whole thing was very interesting. James watched it twice, I think, the whole thing twice. And,
well, at least 1.5 times. Yep.
Yep. So. And I watched it myself without James so that I could take notes, because I have a hard time when there's noise. I can't do things, so
sometimes I'll make comments about things and stuff.
Well, it's not your fault. It's just I work better in the morning on my own.
Plus, I'll sing at the dogs, and then they start crying. I don't know why.
Okay, there's some of that too.
I like to think it's not that bad.
But
no, they just get lonely for you.
Yeah.
Like you could be reading, and they'll start crying with loneliness.
Oh, for the tahini dressing, all I did was mix tahini, so that's sesame seed paste, with, so it doesn't have any fat except for that. That's all. And then I put some hot water, just a little bit, so that it could dissolve, be runny, and put a little bit of hoisin sauce just to sweeten it up. We don't have hoisin very often because hoisin has the sugar in it, but we love it. And so there's some of that in there, and then the juice of 2 limes. So quite a bit of lime juice, like so double the lime juice than the tahini. Quite a bit of lime juice. But the tahini, the hoisin makes it sweet and tasty, and that's tahini sort of sauce can be as easy as that. Just hoisin, tahini, lime, a little bit of water. Shake, shake, shake in a jar, and pour. That's it.
Yep.
So there's no point in ever buying dressing. Never buy dressing. Always put your fat on after you're done cooking, or after. You don't have to buy those pre-made dressings with the awful, poor quality fats in them. Don't do it. Just make your own. It's really easy. It takes like 2 seconds. And there you go. So, and James's gravy for the fries, you just put brown some flour in your cast iron pan, and then you, with one hand you have the fork, and you're just scraping the flour like this, and you're pouring in the broth at the same time. Just really drizzle slowly, and so that you don't get clumps. You just keep going, just like that. Drizzle, drizzle, stir, stir, stir. And then once you have it to a saucy kind of mix, then it doesn't really matter if you pour the fluid in faster or slower. And if you want it browner, you add Marmite, which is healthy, which is good for you. So,
And relatively tasty.
and tasty.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And you could make whatever broth. You could make it with shiitake broth. If you're soaking a lot of shiitake mushrooms for making burgers, say, or whatever, then you can use that broth to make your gravy. And it tastes good. And you can put better than bouillon if you like that. Whatever. But it's so easy. So, and you can use different kinds of flour, whatever flour. You can use, well, not whatever. You can't. But spelt. Spelt works really well. Whatever. Anyway, Etruscan gods and goddesses. So this is from Lecture 7. Etruscan gods and goddesses tended to act collectively, paired rulers of the underworld, Aeta and Persephone. Each goddess had multiple qualities. Tinia was their main god. Is that right?
That's what they say.
His name meant day. He's
That's what they
associated
say.
with birds and wields lightning. He controls weather. He's associated with the underworld. Tinia seems a lot like Odin.
That's what they say.
12 apostles of Jesus, 12 Olympian gods of Greece, 9 group of Etruscan gods, and the Aesir, the same name the Norse gods gave their collective gods. Greek heroes defined by autonomous violence action. Etruscan gods do not act without permission from other gods when it comes to violence. The Etruscan gods acted in council. Roman government had the Roman Senate provide advice and consent. Uni was Tinia's consort. This goddess was like Astarte, Ishtar. Goddess.
I think they actually, Romans got Juno from her.
Okay.
You see how it's got a U and an N there?
Oh, yeah, totally. Goddess of love and fertility as well as goddess of war. Uni was associated with childbirth. Tinia and Uni were the model couple. Uni can even wield the thunderbolt along with Tinia. Etruscan women were partners with their men. Minerva's cult was associated with healing. Aplu became Apollo. And Minerva were patron deities of prophecy. Turin was the oldest of all Etruscan deities. She had wings. She was a nurturer of children. Turin means lady, female ruler, tyrant, but not bad. Is a related word. She is like the earliest example of Aphrodite. Her power is of procreative sexual love. She appears with Lassa, is that right?
Something like that.
The goddess of fate. Thulna, the goddess of childbirth, and Malavisk, the goddess of wedding. Oh God, my notes got. I write in the margins and stuff sometimes. Oh, but I'm not going to read that stuff. So anyway, she had male lovers, Atunes and Hercule. There are more Etruscan goddesses than gods. Divine power more feminine than masculine in this culture. The god of the sun was both female and male, female when rising, male when setting. Etruscan national god Veltha, Veltune, Vertumnus, and Voltumna. He was god of vegetation and changing seasons. The god's gender can be fluid. The appearance changed at will, male, female. Lecture 8, Divination, the will of the gods. Tarkon plowed up a divine being, Tagis. Tagis gave the people of Etruria instructions on divination. His words were recorded. Tarchon became the first Haruspex, priest trained in the art of divination by inspecting entrails. So yeah, they would. I'll go on. There were 5 major types of divination: examination of entrails, flights of birds, portents such as lightning, oracles, and dreams. The Etruscans specialized in the first 3. Birds and portents share a common process. The priest, augur, had to be outdoors in a walled but open precinct, auguraculum, whatever. He'd stand in this precinct and take the auspices. The Etruscans divided the cosmos into 16 segments. Each segment was a province of a particular god. Romans believed that when clouds collided, lightning was emitted. The Etruscans believed that clouds collided in order that lightning may be emitted. The hostile part of the cosmos was the west, land of dead, underworld. The north was most powerful direction because it was overseen by Usil, the sun god. The northeast quadrant was the one of greatest good fortune. The northwest was the region of most dire portents. Etruscans saw the east as familiar, north behind you as most powerful direction. They had a fractal view of the universe. Where birds appeared and went, it mattered. Close attention paid to lightning. There were 3 books of the Etruscan discipline: Interpretation of Lightning, Reading Entrails, and General Rituals. These books haven't survived, but details were mentioned from other authors. One ritual calendar, late 6th or early 5th century BC, survived. Second Etruscan book survived because it was written on linen and was torn up to wrap a mummy in. It was the only preserved book on general rituals. The haruspices, priests who interpreted signs from entrails of sacrificial animals. Prior to any sacrifice, the haruspics had to fast for anywhere from 12 hours to 3 days. On sacrifice day, he purified himself and wore clean clothes. Accompanied by prayers and music, they usually stunned the animals with a blow to the head, and then slit their throats. They collected the blood and inspected it. The entrails were examined to see if the animal was a worthy sacrifice. Sometimes certain organs would be missing. A defective animal meant a failed sacrifice, the displeasure of the god or goddess, and the need to repeat the offering until a positive result was achieved. The priests used models. So they had a Piacenza liver, which was life-size bronze model of sheep's liver, and the liver was most significant of entrails. They looked for deformities and noted things within a particular section associated with one god or another. So they divided, the liver model was divided into 16 segments around the outside, and it was basically looked at as like the heavens, right? In the same way. So,
Now that liver thing came from the Middle East.
you think it came from there?
Oh, the
Okay.
Babylonians used to do that
Almost lost it.
well before.
Well before. Okay, well there you go. So you might be able to find out more from Babylonian sources if you're interested in looking into the liver divination.
Now their divinations might have been very different and stuff like that, but
So lecture 20, Etruscan women. Greek women were removed from political engagement or influence. Not so in Etruscan society. The priestess acted as an agent of political change when a new king was confirmed. Theopompus? I don't know how to say that. A Greek historian in the 4th century BC claimed that sharing wives is an established Etruscan custom, yet Etruscans seem to have practiced monogamy. Etruscan women operated with far more autonomy in public and had far more freedom in private than their Greek or Roman contemporaries. In Greek or Roman cultures, the father looked on a child at birth and decided whether to raise or expose the child. In that moment, father accepted paternity or not. The Etruscans didn't do this. We're closer to Jews and ancient Egyptians. Etruscans did have ritualistic sex in public places as a religious act, in rites of fertility, using sympathetic magic. The women invoked divine protectors of childbirth, like Thalna attended births. At Greek symposia, women were never included as guests, but only as servants, entertainers, or paid companions. Not so with Etruscans. Women socialized with men, other than their husbands. Women proposed toasts. Etruscan women were different from women in other ancient Mediterranean societies. Etruscan women were seemingly equal partners in marriage, fulfilled public civic functions, and were socially engaged. What do you have to say about the Etruscans, James?
well, let's just start with that. Like you'll get the traditional idea of Muslim society. This is before politically correct stuff, but man, oh man, it's so licentious. There's belly dancing, There's guys, divorcing women at a whim and having 4 wives, and it's just ultra sexual and stuff like that. And now when you got Muslims coming over, not even now, back in the 50s, women are just out of, our society's just hypersexual, hypersex. Sometimes when we look at a society from the outside and really don't do our homework, we can kind of do weird things with it. And
Like the Greeks did with the Etruscans.
yeah, exactly right. So Theo Pompus was saying weird things about what, like he was mixing up symposia, which were for men, as a Greek thing, with the Etruscan banquets, and he's saying, man, this licentious women are at these. Right. I think they had women at symposia, but they tended to be kind of like courtesans, which is a fancy word for
That's what he was saying.
So he was misunderstanding, right? And I think maybe the same thing is happening with, I don't know if there are too many societies that really, or now, or particularly back when, that really had much freedom for women, It's just they're looking at women doing certain things and saying, oh, they're out of sight, crazy, ruling things and stuff like that.
I think this society was pretty good for women. The Etruscan society.
Well, we're getting it from the outside. We don't have any sources from within. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's these other sources, and these women are just out of sight crazy. Like they're ruling things and things like that. I think it's to a certain extent.
I don't know. I mean, you have that the oldest god or goddess was a woman. She had wings, so she wasn't like totally
How do
human.
we know it's the oldest god?
I don't know.
Whose sort?
Because she had wings.
She had wings. But
I think he was saying that the older gods tend to not be so human.
Well, I don't know. We don't have their own sources for it, so it's,
Okay. So you're not believing it so much.
No. I think there was a lot of stuff thrown in here. It's a good course, you know what I'm saying? A lot of good basic material, but we've got to be very skeptical about it. See, a lot of this would be new stuff, and like when we tend now, since World War II, when we're looking at old stuff that we didn't understand
You
or whatever.
almost lost your food.
Nowadays, it's like when we're looking at archaeology, or even at early history. Oh, like we see a certain thing here, looks as though it originated here, and then when we see it here, it's diffusion. They don't even say trade, it's diffusion. Some idea went from one, and no way was it ever spread by invasion. There's a valuable concept that can be overused, and it's used in geology, and it's been used in geology and misused, but used. The present is the key to the past. Yes, some stuff has been spread by, not diffusion so much, but by trade, but they don't like to say trade, I'm afraid, because that's what capitalists do. And those guys are bad guys. And yeah, they're bad guys, but they're way worse guys. Anyway, like since World War II,
What was that noise for? Oh, it's Remembrance Day.
Exactly right. Figured that out very well. So, it's just like, here's the thing. Wars should be unpopular in the future, but they shouldn't be unpopular in the past, because you can't change the past. If things happen in the past, they happen. You can't go covering it up. And that's what left-wingers have been doing since World War II. Archaeology. There were no wars back then. And see, the whole thing is, the wars are an invention of capitalists. It's just stupid stuff. Oh my God, I can't stand the stupidity. But that's where this comes from. So I'm afraid a lot of this stuff is recent. And because the Etruscans aren't Greek and Roman, and theoretically not part of the core of so-called Western values, they've got to be better or something like
Interesting.
that. So,
well, I like to get your perspective on things.
Well, I'm just suspicious it could be true. How are we going to find out? They've got 13,000 inscriptions, and almost all of them are basically like R.I.P., rest in peace. That sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So very limited vocabulary. It looks as though they've got the language solved now, at least what little they have of it. They've got a lot of it.
Had it up on the screen sometimes.
They've got a lot of it, but just limited vocabulary, very limited grammar. So it's good to get the basic data that he's given, but be very suspicious of anything that's like an interpretation.
And he was an awesome host.
He does a very
great
good job.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I'm just a little suspicious. He's saying the Greeks were being silly about this, this, and this, and then he's going, the Etruscans were this, this, and this. Well, who's the source? It's these unreliable
right.
Greeks and Romans.
Yeah, you're right about that. If it's
So what happens is, like when I see a lacuna, which is a fancy word for a space in a document, let's say an Egyptian document, I always say to myself, and if someone else is there, I tend to say it maybe too much to my interlocutor, I'll say, man, oh man, look at those dots indicating a lacuna. That an Egyptologist, when he hits that, he's like a pig in a trough. He's like a pig in a trough, in swill in a pigsty, because he's just loving it, because he can make up anything. He or she, it tends to be guys though, make up anything. And unfortunately, that's what happens when we run across the Etruscans. There are all sorts of lacunae and things like that. And then, hey, an academic, particularly someone who's left-wing, yeah, they're just like a pig in, we'll say, swill. But they just start rolling around making things up, So I've seen it too many times in my lifetime, for longer than you've been alive, sadly. And they're getting worse.
Well, here I was wanting to look more into the Etruscans and find some.
Well, look more into it. You know what I'm saying? By all means, it might be 100% true. They might be underestimating that stuff. All I'm saying is be a little extra skeptical because we know so little, right? So I don't know. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there were societies back then that were even more feminist than our society, and things like that? It's I don't know. They fought wars and things like that. They weren't that successful against the Romans, but then no one was. Doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The Greeks were pretty martial, and they practiced more trade. Same sort of thing with the whatever they were. The Punic people, the people in Carthage, they were Phoenicians basically. They were pretty warlike. Hannibal was a classic example. But I think they believed in trade a little bit more than the Romans, and they just didn't practice war as efficiently as the Romans, and they ended up getting wiped out. So. And the Greeks were, what happened? Well, they were turned into slaves. Isn't that incredible? You'd have slave tutors. You'd have Romans teaching their kids, having their kids being taught by a Greek slave. Talk about arrogance, eh? Really pretentiousness.
But I love the course. So I would highly recommend the course.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think everybody should watch it, and everybody should borrow these 2 books from their public library because very, very worthwhile.